The morning sun filtered through oak trees that lined our meticulously maintained front yard, casting dappled shadows across the lawn I had edged to perfection the previous evening. After 15 years of military service across 3 continents, this quiet suburban neighborhood represented everything I had fought to protect. My wife Jennifer and I purchased this modest 2-story colonial as our forever home, where our children could grow up safe and secure. The American dream materialized in 2,400 square feet and a quarter-acre lot. We had moved in during early spring, when the dogwoods were blooming and the promise of new beginnings hung in the air like perfume. Our son Michael had just started middle school, and our daughter Emma was thriving in 4th grade. Jennifer had found work as a nurse at the local hospital, while my military pension and new consulting job provided comfortable stability. The neighbors brought welcome baskets. We hosted a barbecue. Life felt normal in a way it had not during my years of deployment. The homeowners association seemed a small price to pay for community standards. The monthly dues funded the neighborhood pool, the walking trails, and the immaculate common areas. I dutifully read the 78-page covenant, conditions, and restrictions document, implementing every requirement to the letter. Our mailbox matched the approved design. Our exterior paint adhered to the sanctioned palette. Our trash bins remained invisible except on collection days. Then Robert Keller joined the board. His arrival coincided with what we initially perceived as routine changes. The HOA newsletter announced enhanced compliance inspections and stricter enforcement protocols. At the quarterly meeting, Robert introduced himself as a successful local business owner committed to maintaining property values through accountability. His clipboard inspections became increasingly frequent outside our home. "Your garden hose needs to be stored properly," he informed me one Saturday morning, not bothering with pleasantries. I nodded politely, coiled the hose, and placed it in the garage. The following week, a formal notice appeared in our mailbox citing a violation of aesthetic standards because our holiday wreath remained displayed 3 days past the January removal deadline specified in bylaw subsection 14.3. His emails cited infractions no one else received citations for. The trash can left out 5 minutes too long. The garden hose not properly stored despite my immediate compliance. The holiday decorations that allegedly violated aesthetic guidelines, though identical to those displayed by 6 other homes on our street. I extended olive branches. I attended meetings. I followed protocols. Looking back now, I recognize the warning signs I missed. The way his eyes narrowed when he learned about my military record during a community potluck. "Special Forces. So you are one of those who thinks rules are optional," he had said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Jennifer noticed his car slowing when passing our house. Emma mentioned the clipboard man watching her play in the front yard. When I approached him at the community pool to clear the air, he turned away mid-sentence to speak with another board member. I overheard fragments about people who think rules do not apply to them and special treatment. The conversations that abruptly stopped when I approached groups of neighbors at community events. The sideways glances. The whispers. I believed reasonable people could resolve reasonable disagreements. I was wrong. The suburban battlefield was being prepared, and I did not yet realize I was the target. The manila envelopes appeared weekly, then daily. Each contained violation notices with Robert's signature at the bottom, accompanied by grainy photos of alleged infractions that required increasingly powerful magnification to identify. Our fence was supposedly 2 inches over regulation height, though it had passed inspection when installed. Our shed's paint color deviated from approved HOA palette by a shade so subtle it required color sample comparisons to detect. Our children's bicycles on the driveway constituted unsightly recreation equipment storage. despite being moved inside each evening. Jennifer began collecting the notices in a dedicated folder, her nursing training evident in her methodical documentation. "This does not feel random," she observed one evening after finding our third citation that week. "The Hendersons have had a broken shutter for months. The Thompsons park their boat in their driveway every weekend. Why are we the only ones getting these notices?" When our next-door neighbor Maria came over to borrow sugar, she confirmed our suspicions. "Robert has been asking questions about your family at board meetings," she confided, glancing nervously toward her own home. "Specifically about your military service. He seems fixated on it for some reason." The following Saturday, I approached Robert at the community pool where he sat surveying the families like a prison guard in a watchtower. "I would like to discuss these notices," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "Some of these citations seem inconsistent with how the rules are applied elsewhere in the neighborhood." His reaction was immediate and disproportionate. "You military types always think you deserve special treatment," he sneered, loud enough for nearby families to hear. "Some of us stayed home and built communities while others played hero in foreign countries." The shocked silence that followed revealed the social fault lines forming in our once friendly community. Parents gathered their children from the shallow end. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Neighbors who once shared barbecues now exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly uncomfortable with confrontation, but unwilling to intervene. Maria told Jennifer the next day that Robert's brother had been denied military entrance due to medical issues, creating a lifetime of resentment that had festered into a toxic worldview. "He has been on the board for just 6 months and has already forced 3 families to move," she whispered, "all of them with military connections." When my wife found our mailbox smashed one morning with "Read the Rules" scratched into our front door, I installed security cameras covering every approach to our property. The footage captured Robert walking past our home 6 times in a single day, photographing alleged violations from multiple angles. At the next HOA meeting, I raised concerns about selective enforcement. Robert immediately called for a closed executive session, excluding homeowners from the discussion. When the meeting reopened, the board announced escalating fines for repeat offenders without naming specific violations or residents. Michael came home from school with stories about Robert's son telling classmates that special forces people are just licensed killers. Emma stopped playing in the front yard after Robert stood at the property line, photographing her playground equipment, claiming it violated height restrictions. When Robert stood on our property line during Emma's birthday party and warned that accidents happen to people who do not comply, I began recording every conversation. The decorated combat veteran in me recognized the tactical escalation unfolding in what should have been a peaceful suburban enclave. "He is trying to make us leave," Jennifer realized as we sat reviewing security footage that showed Robert measuring our grass with a ruler at 5:30 in the morning. "This is psychological warfare designed to make us surrender our home." I had survived ambushes in actual war zones. I had endured months in hostile territory where every shadow might conceal an enemy. The realization crystallized with cold clarity. Robert Keller had declared war on my family for reasons that had nothing to do with property values or community standards. This was personal, vindictive, and increasingly dangerous. "We are not going anywhere," I assured Jennifer, watching Emma assemble her new bicycle in the garage, too afraid to ride it outside under Robert's watchful gaze. "This is our home. We earned it, and I will not let anyone drive us from it." What I did not tell her was the growing concern taking root in my mind. People who escalate conflicts irrationally often continue escalating until something breaks. I had seen that pattern before, in places where civilization's veneer wore thinner than in suburban America. I would not be driven from my own neighborhood without understanding exactly what we were facing. But I feared this conflict was approaching a breaking point none of us were prepared for. The confrontation occurred on a Tuesday evening as my 10-year-old daughter practiced soccer in our backyard. The spring air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant sound of ice cream trucks making their rounds in neighboring developments. Emma had just mastered a complicated dribbling pattern I had taught her, her face flushed with accomplishment and pride. "Dad, did you see that?" she called, her ponytail bouncing as she prepared to demonstrate again. I gave her a thumbs up from the patio where I was grilling chicken for dinner, appreciating this moment of normalcy amid the growing tension of recent weeks. That was when Robert appeared, striding across our property line without hesitation or announcement. He clutched a handful of papers in one hand, his face already flushed with anger before a single word was exchanged. I set down the grilling tongs and moved toward him, intentionally positioning myself between his approaching figure and my daughter. "You are in direct violation of HOA Covenant Section 17.4, he announced without greeting, waving violation papers about our newly installed playground equipment. The small soccer goal and the basketball hoop Jennifer's parents had given Emma for her birthday stood at the far edge of our yard, well within our property boundaries. Recreation equipment must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation. "Robert, you are on private property," I replied calmly, keeping my voice measured despite the adrenaline beginning to flow. "If you have concerns, please mail them or email them as specified in the HOA communication protocols." Emma had stopped practicing, her ball clutched protectively against her chest as she watched the confrontation unfold. I gestured subtly for her to move toward the house, relieved when she began backing slowly toward the patio door. "Do not tell me about protocols," Robert snarled, stepping closer. "I am the protocol in this neighborhood. That unauthorized equipment comes down today or the fines start tomorrow. $100 per day, compounding weekly." When I stepped further between him and my daughter, his face contorted with rage. "You think you are untouchable," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "You and your military entitlement. This neighborhood has standards. Standards that apply to everyone, even war heroes." Then came the moment that changed everything. His jacket swept back as he reached toward his waistband, revealing the pistol holstered there. "Maybe you need to understand there are consequences," he hissed, his hand resting on the weapon. The threat was unmistakable. Time slowed as combat instincts flooded my system. 15 years of training calculated distances, angles, and response options automatically. I positioned myself to shield my daughter while maintaining visual contact with the threat. My peripheral vision registered Emma's terrified expression, the soccer ball dropping forgotten to the grass. My wife appeared at the back door, frozen in horror at the tableau before her. "Emma, come inside now," she called, her nurse's training evident in the calm authority of her voice despite the fear clearly visible in her eyes. Robert must have realized he had crossed a line because he backed away, his hand moving from the weapon. "I was just making a point," he said, his tone shifting to something approaching reasonable. "The equipment needs proper approval. Rules exist for a reason." "You just threatened a child with a firearm," I stated flatly, memorizing every detail of the moment. "The security cameras recorded everything. You need to leave our property immediately." He retreated then, muttering about misunderstandings and overreactions. As he disappeared around the side of the house, I heard Emma begin to cry behind me. Jennifer had her arms wrapped protectively around our daughter, both of them shaking. I called the police immediately, describing the incident in precise detail. When they arrived 20 minutes later, I provided the security footage showing the entire interaction, including the clear image of the holstered weapon and Robert's threatening posture and words. The responding officers treated it as a neighborhood dispute despite the security footage showing the implied threat. No weapon was brandished, they explained after reviewing the video. He never drew the gun or pointed it. It appears to be legally carried. He threatened my family while armed, I countered, struggling to maintain my composure. He trespassed on private property and used the presence of his weapon to intimidate a child. Look, the older officer said, closing his notebook. This is clearly an HOA dispute that got heated. We can take a report, but the district attorney is unlikely to pursue charges based on what we can see here. You might want to take it to civil court or speak with the HOA board about his conduct. That night, as my daughter had nightmares and my wife researched homes in different school districts, something crystallized within me. I sat in our darkened living room watching the security monitors, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on my shoulders. We cannot move, Jennifer said, joining me with 2 cups of tea. That is what he wants, but I am scared, John. That man has a gun and a grudge, and the police just brushed it off. The system designed to protect us had failed, I acknowledged, taking her hand. But that does not mean we are without options. As a military intelligence specialist, I had learned that direct confrontation often proves less effective than strategic preparation and precise execution. This situation required the strategic thinking that had kept me and my unit alive through 3 deployments. This was no longer about property values or community standards. This was about protecting my family using every legal means at my disposal. I need a spare room for planning, I told Jennifer, my decision made. And I need you to trust that I can handle this without escalating the danger. What are you going to do? She asked, worry lines deepening around her eyes. Robert has brought a gun to what had been a war of words, I replied, the outlines of a multi-phase operation already forming in my mind. Now I will respond with something far more effective than violence, precision intelligence gathering and tactical planning. He has no idea who he is dealing with. My military career taught me that superior intelligence wins conflicts before they escalate to kinetic confrontation. Within 24 hours of the incident, I established a command center in our spare bedroom. Walls covered with documents, timelines, and connection maps that would have looked familiar to any intelligence officer I had served with overseas. Every HOA bylaw, county ordinance, and state statute related to homeowner rights and threats occupied one wall. Robert's history and network filled another. I created a detailed profile of our adversary, identifying patterns, vulnerabilities, and potential pressure points that could be legally and ethically leveraged. You are preparing for war, Jennifer observed from the doorway, bringing me coffee as I compiled data at 2 a.m. I am preparing to end one, I corrected her, without casualties. I conducted reconnaissance at precise intervals, photographing his property from public spaces using telephoto lenses and documenting every detail that might prove relevant. His unauthorized satellite dish installed on the side of his house, rather than the rear as required by HOA guidelines. His non-compliant water feature that exceeded permitted dimensions by 30%. The fence staining that deviated from approved colors in a way far more noticeable than our own alleged infractions. The commercial vehicle from his construction business, parked overnight against explicit HOA regulations. His consistent Tuesday evening absence created an opportunity to attend HOA meetings he typically controlled through intimidation and procedural manipulation. There I connected with other victims of his selective enforcement campaign, carefully building alliances while maintaining operational security. The elderly couple threatened with liens over medical equipment visible from the street, an oxygen tank discreetly stored on their side porch. The single mother fined repeatedly for children's toys allegedly left in view of the street, though security camera footage showed her meticulous cleanup each evening. The veteran with PTSD harassed about his service dog with claims it violated pet restrictions, despite clear ADA protections. I gathered affidavits, recordings, and documentation from 17 households, each reporting similar patterns of harassment and selective enforcement. Nearly all cases involved residents who had questioned Robert's authority or who represented demographics he seemed to resent: military families, minorities, single parents, and the elderly on fixed incomes. I studied the HOA financial records available to members, noting irregular patterns in contractor selection. 3 companies received the majority of neighborhood maintenance contracts, all at rates significantly above market value. Cross-referencing business registration records revealed connections between these contractors and Robert's construction company through shared addresses and overlapping ownership structures. I consulted discreetly with an attorney specializing in homeowner rights, a retired police lieutenant about the gun incident, and a forensic accountant about the financial discrepancies. Each interaction was documented, each piece of evidence preserved following chain of custody procedures I had learned in military investigations. "What if he escalates further?" Jennifer asked one night, the worry evident in her voice as she helped me organize evidence folders. "He has already threatened Emma with a gun. What is to stop him from doing worse?" "Predators like Robert rely on isolation and fear," I explained, showing her the network map of allies we had cultivated. "They target those they perceive as vulnerable or unsupported. We are systematically removing both advantages." I identified key decision-makers in local government and community leadership who might be receptive to properly presented evidence. I mapped influence networks and pressure points within the property management company that ostensibly provided oversight for the HOA board. I researched the bonding agency that insured board members against liability claims. This was not about revenge but strategic dismantling of a threat to my family and community. Robert had chosen to intimidate a family without realizing the father possessed specialized training in asymmetric response. He had selected his target poorly. The plan took shape: a systematic, multi-phase operation with primary objectives, secondary targets, and clearly defined success metrics. Each phase built upon the previous, creating escalating pressure through entirely legal means. Phase 1 would involve simultaneous formal complaints to multiple regulatory and law enforcement agencies, creating documentation trails and official investigations that would limit Robert's freedom of action. Phase 2 focused on financial accountability, targeting the suspicious contracting relationships and potential conflicts of interest that appeared to benefit Robert personally at neighborhood expense. Phase 3 prepared for public exposure through carefully timed information releases to both the community and potentially local media, should earlier phases prove insufficient. "This is not what I expected when we bought a house in the suburbs," Jennifer said with a sad smile, reviewing the operation timeline I had prepared. "Nor I admitted. But there is something familiar about it. In the military, we protect what matters most against those who would threaten it. The battlefield has changed, but the mission remains the same. The final element fell into place when our security cameras captured Robert inspecting our property line at night with a flashlight, muttering to himself about making them pay and teaching them respect. The footage, properly time-stamped and preserved, completed our preparation phase. I looked at the comprehensive intelligence package assembled on our spare room walls. 15 years in military intelligence had taught me that information, properly deployed, could be more decisive than any weapon. Robert had chosen armed intimidation against a family whose patriarch specialized in information warfare. His tactical error would prove catastrophic to his campaign against us. Operations commenced with synchronized precision. At 9:00 a.m. Monday, 23 formal complaints hit multiple agencies simultaneously: Police Department, District Attorney, State Attorney General, Department of Real Estate, and County Recorder's Office. Each contained meticulously organized evidence packets tailored to relevant jurisdictions and regulatory frameworks. The police department received enhanced security footage of the gun incident, complete with professional analysis from the retired lieutenant highlighting elements that constituted criminal threatening under state law. The district attorney's office got sworn affidavits from witnesses corroborating a pattern of intimidation. The state attorney general received documentation of possible fair housing violations, targeting protected classes, including disabled residents and families with children. By noon, 15 households submitted notarized statements to the property management company's corporate headquarters and their bonding agency, detailing Robert's pattern of selective enforcement and intimidation. The evidence suggested potential liability exposure far exceeding their insurance coverage if complaints progressed to litigation. "We have established multiple pressure systems," I explained to Jennifer as we reviewed progress that evening. "Each operates independently, but they reinforce each other in ways Robert cannot easily counter." The community newsletter I had volunteered to edit featured a special section on understanding your HOA rights, with anonymized examples that neighbors instantly recognized as Robert's actions. The educational format provided legal protection while systematically dismantling the misinformation Robert had used to control the neighborhood. "Can he retaliate?" Jennifer asked, still concerned about escalation despite our preparations. "His options narrow with each passing day," I assured her. "Every system we have activated increases scrutiny on his actions. The security measures we have implemented monitor all approaches to our property. He operates best in shadows. We have turned on the lights." When Robert arrived at my door that evening, furious and threatening legal action, the high-definition cameras captured every word of his tirade about consequences and knowing people in local government. His performance provided valuable additional evidence for the ongoing investigations and complaint processes. "You do not know what you have started," he snarled, his face flushed with anger. "I built this community. I decide who belongs here." "That will be an interesting legal position to defend," I replied calmly, noting how his right hand twitched reflexively toward his waistband before he caught himself. "Is there anything else, Robert? The cameras are recording." The following day, the certified letter from our attorney arrived at each board member's home, detailing the gun incident with witness statements and security footage stills. The letter outlined potential personal liability for board members who failed to address threatening behavior by a fellow member, carefully explaining how their personal assets might be exposed if they continued ignoring the situation. 2 board members called me directly that afternoon, suddenly eager to discuss concerns about leadership dynamics and potential governance issues they had supposedly harbored for months. The alliance-building phase had successfully created fractures in Robert's support network. The unexpected discovery came when the forensic accountant identified 3 vendors receiving HOA contracts that traced back to shell companies connected to Robert's construction business. The conflict of interest created potential criminal liability under state statutes governing homeowners associations, information I immediately forwarded to the investigating agencies. The county inspector, responding to anonymous reports, arrived to examine unpermitted structural modifications to Robert's home addition. The resulting stop work order and potential fines created additional pressure on our adversary precisely when he needed to focus on defending against other challenges. The property management company assigned an investigator to review the harassment claims, placing Robert's board voting privileges under temporary suspension pending resolution. Their corporate risk management department, suddenly alert to potential liability exposure, began reviewing years of meeting minutes and enforcement actions with fresh scrutiny. These were not killing blows, but the opening moves in a carefully orchestrated campaign. Each action generated documentation. Each response created new leverage points. Just as military operations require patience and discipline, I maintained operational security while the pressure systems established themselves. "The neighborhood feels different," Jennifer observed one evening as we walked Emma to her friend's house down the street. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now waved and stopped to chat. Several mentioned the newsletter's HOA rights section appreciatively. Robert's increasingly erratic responses suggested the psychological impact was taking effect. Security footage captured him packing near our property line, visibly agitated but unwilling to cross boundaries now marked with "no trespassing" signs and documented with cameras. His attempts to call emergency board meetings failed when other members cited scheduling conflicts. "He is losing control," I noted to Jennifer after the third such cancellation. "And control is everything to someone like him." The strategic advantage had shifted. For the first time since the conflict began, my family slept peacefully, knowing we had transitioned from defense to a coordinated counteroffensive conducted entirely within legal and ethical boundaries. No laws had been broken, no threats issued. We had simply activated systems designed to provide accountability and oversight, systems Robert had long circumvented through intimidation and procedural manipulation. "You are not fighting the person," I had learned from my commanding officer years ago. "You are fighting their ability to continue fighting." Robert's capacity to threaten my family diminished with each new investigation, each documented violation, each erosion of his authority and support base. Robert called an emergency HOA meeting, ostensibly to address dangerous elements threatening community standards. The community center buzzed with tension as neighbors filled every seat. Robert had stacked the front rows with his remaining supporters, primarily business associates and neighbors who had benefited from selective enforcement exemptions. What he did not realize was that this gathering provided the perfect forum for Phase 6 of our operation. The public setting with official record-keeping requirements created an environment where his tactics would face unprecedented scrutiny. Jennifer squeezed my hand reassuringly as Robert took the podium, his usual confidence visibly strained. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleep deprivation, while his typically immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of neglect. The pressure systems were having their intended effect. "We face a crisis in our community," he began, shuffling papers nervously. "Certain elements are undermining the standards that protect our property values and community safety." He attempted to introduce a special assessment for security measures, targeting our street specifically, a transparent attempt to create financial pressure on households that had allied against him. I waited for the procedural opening required by the bylaws, carefully timing my intervention. When the chair asked for discussion before voting, I requested speaking time according to procedures outlined in Section 7.2 of the HOA bylaws. The projector I had set up beforehand illuminated the wall with a timeline of every documented incident. Before we discuss new expenditures, I stated calmly, we should address the armed threat made against a child on private property. This incident raises significant liability concerns for the association and its members. The room fell silent as security footage played, showing Robert's hand on his weapon while my daughter stood frozen in our yard. Several parents audibly gasped. A board member whispered urgently to the property management representative. Then came the financial documents revealing the conflict of interest in vendor contracts. The screen displayed business registration records showing connections between maintenance companies receiving HOA contracts and Robert's construction business, with highlighted sections indicating shared addresses and overlapping ownership structures. The association has paid approximately $172,000 over market rate to these connected companies during the past 14 months, I noted, allowing the significance to register with homeowners who paid dues to fund these contracts. The photographic evidence of his own property violations appeared next, organized in side-by-side comparisons with violation notices sent to other residents for identical issues. The systematic pattern of selective enforcement became impossible to ignore. The testimony from the elderly couple he had threatened with foreclosure over medical equipment produced audible murmurs of disapproval throughout the room. The wife, using her oxygen tank, described how Robert had photographed her medical equipment and issued violation notices despite documented medical necessity. Robert lunged for the projector, shouting about manipulated evidence and military intelligence operation, terms that only reinforced the impression of his instability. His face flushed dark red as he struggled to regain control of the narrative and the meeting. "This is a coordinated attack," he shouted, pointing accusingly at me. "They are using psychological warfare tactics, military intelligence operations against civilians." When the property management representative attempted to restore order, Robert made his fatal error, grabbing her arm and threatening that she would regret interfering with things she did not understand. The physical contact crossed a line that could not be explained away. 3 board members immediately distanced themselves, physically moving their chairs away from him. The management representative announced an immediate recess and called their legal department, stepping quickly away from Robert's attempt to continue the conversation privately. Outside, neighbors I had never spoken with approached to share their own experiences. He threatened to have my disability accommodation request denied if I did not support his board candidacy, confided a resident who used a wheelchair. "I have it recorded on my phone." The tide had visibly turned. The community that had been fragmented by intimidation was reunifying in its absence. People exchanged contact information, compared notes on violation notices, and openly discussed problematic board decisions that had previously gone unchallenged. The property management representative emerged from her phone call with a grave expression. "The meeting is postponed pending review by our legal team," she announced. "The board will reconvene with corporate counsel present to address the concerns raised today." Robert's desperate attempt to reassert control had instead created the perfect conditions for his complete isolation. As he stormed toward the parking lot, he found his car surrounded by news crews responding to an anonymous tip about armed threats and financial improprieties in suburban HOA. The cameras captured his final meltdown as he threatened journalists with consequences, language eerily similar to his threats against my family. His attempt to shield his face from cameras only drew more attention as he fled the scene, leaving board members to answer uncomfortable questions about oversight and accountability. "You planned for this," Jennifer whispered as we watched from a discreet distance. "I planned for multiple scenarios," I corrected her. "Robert selected this one through his own actions. The pressure system simply created conditions where his true nature would reveal itself when he could no longer control the situation." The strategic objective had been achieved without a single act of aggression on our part. By simply creating transparency and accountability, we had allowed Robert's own behavior to become his undoing. In military terms, we had achieved victory through superior intelligence and strategic patience rather than direct confrontation. The aftermath unfolded with methodical inevitability. The district attorney filed charges for criminal threatening and brandishing a weapon based on the enhanced evidence package and witness testimony. The state attorney general opened an investigation into HOA financial practices after evidence of self-dealing and conflicts of interest proved impossible to ignore. Robert received a court order prohibiting contact with my family and restricting firearm possession pending resolution of criminal charges. The restraining order expanded to include several other families after similar incidents came to light